Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everyone. Uh, Start with just making note of some of the presentations the last couple of weeks have been really amazing. Laura's alluded to these, and particularly a couple of weeks ago, reference to Blavatsky's article, Psychic and Noetic Action. Written in 1890, she drew heavily on the work of a respected American philosopher and psychologist, Professor George Turnbull Ladd, who taught at Yale University and became the second president of the American Psychological Society. And what's amazing is that the ideas that she talks about in Psychic and Noetic Action are now part of the modern conversation. By that I mean the what scientists, investigators, brain science, and neurologists, cosmologists are talking about. Now the language is different, but the implications are the same. We are talking about the nature of the human mind, its connections with the world, the parallels between the mind and the universe, the context in which we look at what it is to be aware and what little is actually known about the mind. So I'd like to start with a quotation from Madame Blavatsky from her Secret Doctrine um, on the nature of consciousness, where she says, everything in the universe throughout all its kingdoms is conscious, that is endowed with a consciousness of its own kind and on its own plane of perception. We men must remember that because we do not perceive any signs which we can recognize of consciousness, say in stones, we have no right to say that no consciousness exists there. There is no such thing as either dead or blind matter, as there is no blind or unconscious law. It's an amazing statement. What's even more amazing is that we will find and consider a few of the modern references to this kind of idea. Um, Contemporary science, has some very positive and encouraging explorations in this area. Uh, they barely are scratching the surface, but the increasingly we are running across brilliant reasoning and intuition, an approach to the ancient teachings that 100 years ago, 150 years ago, one would hardly think possible. So we ask the question, what is consciousness? What is the mind? Well, let's consider this. Each of us right now, right here, this moment, is experiencing something quite amazing and wonderful. That is, it is a subjective experience of being ourselves. What is it? Where does it come from? The scientific standard answer is that we're describing the function of the human brain. In that view, it's only a semantic question to ask what is mind, and even less relevant to ask, well, what is the soul? But that wonderful, apparently unique capacity of human beings to think about thinking, unfortunately, from a scientific perspective, has largely been considered an epiphenomenon, the result of complex biochemistry of the brain. The problem is that for 200 years, that's been the easy part. Observation, measurement, weighing, the experience, and so forth. It's all been done. What remains has been called the hard problem of consciousness. That is, how is it that subjective experience comes out of the biochemistry of the brain? So, what's happening in science has been a result of a great deal of research, change in viewpoint. We are looking at what could be called a paradigm shift, a change driven by an accumulation of observations that just don't fit the accepted theories, can't be made to fit by mere extension of those ideas. So the stage has been set for probably almost 50 years now for a new and better scientific paradigm. Now, it's a widespread paradigm shift. It affects not only consciousness studies, brain studies, but also our understanding of the nature of the human body and its connections with all forms of life, and in fact, with the very substance of the universe. This shift in thinking is so vast, so comprehensive, so challenging to the established views that we'll only be able to touch on a little bit of it today. It's partly connected, and we'll only be able again to allude to this, to the interconnectedness of all life and all minds through what in the ancient world and in Theosophy was called the Akashic realm, Akasha, astral. Today, serious scientists are calling it the Akashic field. Next slide, please. We've got one out of place, I think. Can we go back one slide, Jerry? Yeah, let's stay there. Thank you. There's really three areas in modern research that are having trouble with the idea of the mind. This, what has been called by scientists themselves, the hard problem of consciousness. First of all, conscious experience, human experience, can't be explained or reduced by the physical brain mechanisms. Secondly, modern physics has raised serious questions about what we consider reality. What is real? What is the nature of matter itself? And thirdly, the phenomena of all kinds of psychic consciousness, awareness, experience of human beings. A remarkable literature has come out about those kinds of phenomena, everything from out-of-body and near-death experiences to mystical states, dreams, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and so forth. All has become a huge minefield, and as well as a source of investigation and new ideas, much of it paralleling the Theosophic views. So let's look at the next slide, please. We've talked about the first issue, the problem of self-awareness, the problem of how subjective experience comes out of biochemical fields and so forth. The second area, of course, has to do with what is considered real. Everything from all sorts of subatomic field theories show that reality stuff of that matter that science can look at is no longer possible to be seen as only the atoms and the void. The Akashic field that we referred to has now been called the 0-point field. It is that energy field below which no activity should be possible, and yet there is still movement. What has been called quantum fluctuation shows activity at extremely tiny subatomic levels, and yet these levels still show an interconnectedness, fields of awareness between and amongst not only different beings within the human being, within the human body, but also connecting the individual with the universe, with all of activity, all of life. And that field of experience seems to be growing by leaps and bounds. There's just all kinds of things that no longer can be explained by the reductive method of saying it's just atoms and the void. Let's go to our next slide, please. And this is the third area, the inexplicable phenomena that um, we're faced with, the things that have happened to human beings now take up volumes. Things that were considered in Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled and many numerous articles now are the stuff of serious investigation on the part of researchers. Uh, they simply cannot explain what's going on here with all of the kinds of phenomena that are happening. Um, let's go to our next slide. The essential question being asked is consciousness part of the fabric of the universe? Oh, that's an amazing question. This is something being asked by modern researchers, scientists who are doing real work in the world. A few years ago, Philip Goff of the University of Durham in England wrote, Panpsychism posits that consciousness is not confined to biological entities, but is a fundamental feature of all physical matter, from subatomic particles to the human brain. Now, other writers are saying that not only is it subatomic particles, but it is the entire universe itself, that those particles represent a field of essentially of consciousness that affects all of the universe, all of the time, throughout all times. Um, these are not fringe ideas. This idea of panpsychism, although controversial and getting a lot of pushback from, we would say, the traditional scientific community, still has gained traction. Why? Because it helps to explain the phenomena, it helps to explain what scientists are finding out about the nature of the brain and about the nature of the cosmos itself, about the fundamental stuff of the universe from a scientific perspective. Go to our next slide. We mentioned the Akashic record, but what or who looks at the Akashic record? What is that? And it would seem to be that we are looking at what we would call what Professor Ladd in Blavatsky's time called the real unit being. So the real unit being is that we would say theosophically, ego, soul. We can use different terms. Terms today are still in flux. So we'll use George T. Ladd's term from Psychic and Noëtic Action. Blavatsky quotes him, and he says that the history of each individual's experience is such as requires the assumption that a real unit being, a mind, is undergoing a process of development in relation to the changing condition or evolution of the brain, and yet in accordance with the nature and laws of its own. Very much describes how our minds work. They are independent of and yet using a tool of the brain itself. So, as put by another student over some time ago, but a modern student, our awareness comes through the brain, is not coming from the brain. So that real unit being, the mind, is now at the heart of some serious scientific investigation after, 140 years or so, after George T. Ladd proposed it in his work, Elements of Physiological Psychology, which, by the way, became something of a standard textbook for many years. New students in college read his work and considered this idea of the real unit being. Now, it came out of favor for quite a while, but it's back. And it's back because it helps explain the phenomena that they see in their experiments. It helps explain the kinds of things that are going on in human life. Let's go to our next slide. Blavatsky pointed out something really important about the, the brain itself and our own memory. And she wrote, indeed, every organ in our body has its own memory, for it is endowed with a consciousness of its own kind. Every cell must of necessity have also a memory of its own kind, as likewise its own psychic and noetic action. Now here, she's introduced another element. You could say two elements. One, the nature of memory as being universal, not only in the brain itself, but in all the cells of the body. And by applying the idea of the astral, the akasha, and today's akashic record, we would say that the idea is coming out that everything in the universe has a memory. The akashic record, they call it the 0 point field, but still that akashic record records everything that happens. It is that field, background field of all life. In fact, it is the substance of all life. And then today you have a scientist writing the following. The substances that coexist at a given time produce thousands of biochemical reactions in the human body, each and every second. And they're all precisely and almost instantly coordinated as they maintain the dynamic order of the whole organism. What is he saying? He's saying that the human body reacts instantly to forces within and without it. There are literally 100 million billion cells in the human body, and some hundreds of millions of them die every minute. There are new cells that take their place. The question is, how does that all stay connected? How does it stay in sync? Suggests that understanding how the astral body works would help explain some of that. But the work today and they are calling the Akashic field would also go a long way to explaining these kinds of things that happen in our own bodies, in our own experience, not in our conscious experience, but in the experience of our bodies. Let's take our next slide. Robert Crosby pointed out something really important that was lacking in Western psychology. And he wrote about it in his notes on the Bhagavad Gita, where he says that Western psychology in its classifications refers solely to mental states. The psychology of the Gita and the ancient sages classifies the immoral states, treating the mental states as mere effects produced by moral conditions. That's a lot to unpack. But what he's saying is, without understanding ethics, without understanding motive, without understanding our higher proclivities, rather than simply our biological functioning, and understanding what compassion means, we won't understand human beings at all. And yet we have modern writers, Irving Laszlo most notably, who speaks of the ethics and natural philosophy of this new worldview can help explicate and justify an emerging super-rational social ethics, or ethos, reverence for natural systems. But what does he mean, reverence for natural systems? That's compassion, appreciating, understanding our own nature, our own physical nature, but also, more importantly, our own ethical, moral, and compassion nature. What Blavatsky calls in her article, Psychic and Noetic Action, what she calls the noetic aspect of ourselves. So we get current thinkers meeting with the Dalai Lama, speaking about how important being kind and compassionate and universal in our thinking has become. Philosophers, scientists, neurologists no longer look at just the outer being. They're now looking at what it means to be human, what it means to be that inner being, that inner mind being, that inner entity that looks on the world through the lenses of the senses, uses the brain, but also has higher faculties and more important interactions with the world. Let's go to our next slide, please. Blavatsky wrote that the higher noetic character of the mind in principle is entirely ignored and even rejected as a superstition by both physiologists and psychologists. Well, that was true in 1890. It is no longer true today. The noetic potential of human beings is no longer being ignored in the scientific community. As the views of the essentially views of the ancient wisdom come again into vogue, we'll probably find further research that redefines human beings as far more than rational animals driven by biological imperatives and those limited views of ourselves. We would suggest that Theosophy, what Blavatsky calls in one place, the rational explanation of things, along with the core tenets, will provide a basis for a new and more universal understanding of our consciousness. It will give new life and new meaning to the efforts of what Erwin Laszlo called the necessity to re-enchant the cosmos. Ancient Manus then has come back. It has a new look. There are new terms, but it faces the same problems of human consciousness, but also of universal awareness. How things in the entire universe are all living part of that fabric of life. Scientists are fast approaching the same underlying ideas about the importance of the role of the mind and consciousness in the universe. So ancient Manus, modern mind, look at the same problems, the same issues, us human beings, and what it is to be human, and what are the instruments through which we contact ourselves, each other, and the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes.